Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day today. My name is Carmen Quintana, and I am, first of all, delighted to be spending time with you today. And I'm going to share my screen now. So we're going to be talking a little bit about formative assessments, but primarily we're going to be focusing on formative assessments as a key component of the English learning proficiency journey. So I hope everyone can see my screen. Oh, yes, you can see my screen. I can see the chat comments. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. Okay, so just to quickly talk you through the agenda for today, I want us to spend some time just looking broadly at the CEFR and what it was intended to do. Then let's talk a little bit into common types of assessment in the English language learning journey. From that, we're going to segue into formative assessments in ELL. What are some of their characteristics and what are some of the existing challenges? And for the latter part of the presentation today, I want us to talk a little bit about how we can measure proficiency with improved precision using the global scale of English, how we can incorporate it into day-to-day instruction, and also how the Pearson English assessment journey has been mapped to support the different stages of the language learning proficiency stage. Okay, so let's start with the CEFR. I am positive you probably know this better than I do, but the CEFR is one of the most widely used scales for English language proficiency. And it goes from what it's known to be as a basic user. So if we look at the broad description for an A1 user, they can probably communicate in some very urgent situations. They can probably communicate very crucial needs and use simple phrases, but it's not likely that they're able to do far more than that. Now, usually what we're trying to do with our learners is progress them to a B2 level, typically. B2 is one of the most commonly requested levels across educational systems and job markets across the world. But let's look for a minute at what it says for the B2 learner. For the B2 learner, the broad description says that they can understand the main ideas of complex texts, both on concrete and abstract topics. What does that mean, concrete and abstract topics? It's very broad, and it's obviously something that takes quite a significant amount of time to get to. Now, when we get to the holy grail of proficiency, the C2 level, the expectation is that this candidate performs at the level of an educated native speaker, so they can understand with ease virtually everything heard or read. But how do we get there? And how do we measure that? So we're going to spend some time discussing this today. The prime objectives of the CEFR, when it was initially published, was to establish a meta language to talk about objectives and language levels. And it very much accomplished that. Across the world, the CEFR is a standard of reference for the different levels of proficiency. This was also intended to encourage practitioners to reflect on their current practice and how they could help progress their learners through the different stages. And then, of course, to agree on common reference points. We still know that there are a number of scales for proficiency distributed across assessments or educational systems, but the CEFR has achieved that common reference ground. So, naturally, when we talk about our types of assessment in ELL, we're also looking at our assessments from the perspective of how we can help our learners get to where they need to be, where our goals are. And it's ultimately everything that we do as educators is focused on the learner at the heart of everything. For all areas of knowledge, assessment is a key component. ELL is no different. So different types of assessment are required throughout the journey to better support the needs of our learners and the objectives of our learners. Now, there are two of these common types of assessments which have a common objective, which is to understand where our learners are currently standing and understand what we need to do in order to help them progress. Within that distinction, we have diagnostic assessments, which are typically used at the start of a learning experience. They aim to provide a measure of current proficiency levels for our candidates, and they aim to help us tailor instruction. When I refer to tailor instruction, I'm referring to how we can customize or personalize, I think is a better word, the learning journey for our particular groups of candidates. Then we go on to formative assessments. Formative assessments are supposed to allow learners to demonstrate what they've been learning. I'm going to delve a little deeper into formative assessments as we progress. They're intended to help teachers and learners measure progress against goals, because very often we share our goals with our learners. We have this idea of what we want to help them achieve based on what we know their needs are. But they also highlight any areas of need, any areas where the candidate might need improvement. And I would go as far as to say, not just improvement, because when we talk about improvement, perhaps we're thinking about remediation activities, but also areas where they could possibly benefit with some enhancement activities. And then again, the objective of these is to help tailor instruction, help us personalize instruction for our learners. One of the final stages in every learning cycle can be a summative assessment. This can be a classroom test, for example, but it can also be a certificate that they are intended to achieve at the end of a particular educational cycle. It can also be a state exam, which is mandated as an end of cycle test. These are tests that provide a quantitative grade. So they are not particularly looking at helping to tailor instruction, but they're more focused on having a snapshot of the candidate's skills and performance at that particular level. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about formative assessments, characteristics, and main challenges. What is a formative assessment? You'll find a number of definitions across literature in different journals and different sources of information. I quite like this one, so I thought I'd share it with you. I don't intend to read all of it, but I want to focus on certain points. Formative assessment, according to the Handbook of Formative Assessment quoted here, is a test or other system of information gathering. So we're not just talking about tests, although when we hear the word assessment, sometimes that's the first thing that we think about. And they're very good forms of assessment indeed, but it can be another form of information gathering. Now, in order for them to be considered formative assessment, they need to meet two criteria. And that's my favorite part about this definition, that it puts criteria at the front and center so that we can better understand if the things that we're doing actually qualify as formative assessments. The first one is that it would be administered midstream in the course of whatever cycle of instruction. It can be that you're working in yearly cycles or semester cycles or quarterly cycles, depending on the needs of your learners. If you're working in the K through 12 system, you're looking at school years. If you're working at the higher ed level, you're probably looking at semesters. And if you're working in language schools, then you're probably looking something like semesters as well. Now, the second part of that criteria is that the purpose of formative assessments is one or more of the following: to identify the students' strengths and weaknesses, to assist educators in the planning of subsequent instruction. Remember what we mentioned earlier about tailoring instruction, to aid students in guiding their own learning, revising their own work, and gaining self-evaluation skills, and to foster increased autonomy and responsibility for learning on the part of the student. This is something that it's important in all learning aspects, but when we're talking about learning a language and becoming proficient in a language, we know that a certain ownership on behalf of the candidate for their learning journey is in fact critical to success. Now, For this part of the presentation, I would like to hear from you. So my question to you is, when you plan a formative assessment for your classes, what are your primary goals? And here you can select more than one option. So you can pull out your phones, scan the QR code on the screen, or you can join at slido.com and enter the code on the screen and start answering. So I'm going to give a couple of minutes for this. The options are very much the options that we saw as part of the definition. Remember, it can be one or more of the following. What are your primary drivers when you plan a formative assessment for your classes? Again, you can scan the QR code using your phones, or you can join, again, using your phone browser, using slido.com and entering the code on screen. All right, I see some of you have already started to answer. Come on, scan the QR code. Let me know what you're thinking. This is super important for us to learn from you. What are your primary drivers? So scan the QR code. I see somebody's posted in the chat 1 and 3. So identify student strengths and weaknesses and support the planning of subsequent instruction. Come on, I'm going to have another minute. So come through and answer the poll. This is fantastic. I love seeing how the responses shift as more and more of you are providing your answers. Remember, scan your QR code or go to your browser and enter the code. I see somebody's posted in the chat 2, 3, and 4. Strength, wellness, and later progress. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing there as well. We're almost at the top of that additional minute, so make sure you are submitting your answers. All right. So the primary driver for the people who responded this poll is unquestionably to identify the student's strengths and weaknesses. The second primary driver seems to be to aid students in guiding their own learning. Then we have support in the planning of subsequent instruction and the fostering of increased autonomy. Thank you so much to everyone who's taken a minute to answer this poll. Really enjoy hearing from you. So now let's move a little bit over to what are some of the challenges to formative assessments and the English language learning. Now, some of these are transferable to formative assessments everywhere, really. So one of the main challenges is purpose. Their value lies in not being summative, but focus on remediation and enhancement. This goes into what I mentioned earlier. When we are addressing formative assessment, we might encounter that the candidates we are assessing, or a subsegment of the candidates that we are assessing, are actually advanced compared to their classmates. So we have heterogeneous classes. In that case, that candidate doesn't need remediation. They need enhancement activities, activities to keep them challenged and motivated. That might not necessarily be summative activities. And then the same is true for remediation. If a candidate is significantly below the level they're expecting to achieve, they're going to need additional support. So understanding where they stand is critical for us to be able to support them. The second challenge I've listed here, it's one that is, I would dare say it's common across all fields of education, and it's that developing, scoring, and providing personalized feedback on formative assessments requires a substantial amount of time investment. When you have numerous learners and you need to be doing this regularly, it is incredibly time-consuming for our educators. One of the third challenges, of course, is validity. How does the evidence support the interpretation of the subject results? What this means in practical terms is, has the assessment I have created really measured what I intended for it to measure? Does it steer away from biases? Is it objective? And sometimes when we're capturing the performance of our learners, it can be a little bit challenging to be 100% completely objective because we know them well enough to know that this is a snapshot of their performance. And we know that they might have been nervous. We see that they might have felt challenged, but what is their objective performance in the assessment showing us? And how can we help them work through what the content is, but also through those other variables that might be affecting their performance? And one of the last points that I would mention in terms of challenges has to do with measuring progress using solely the CEFR. The main challenge here lies in the fact that there is no standard measure as to say how long it will take for a learner to progress between levels. So we might have a very eager A1 learner who is soaking up all the direct instruction that you're providing and all the activities that you're providing and is progressing rather rapidly. The opposite might also be true. You might find that a candidate is progressing slower. This is because there are a number of variables that affect how fast a learner can progress across levels. And then we have what I call the very steep curve between B1 and B2. It takes quite a lot to progress between those two levels. They're very broad in terms of the descriptors that are encompassed and the ability that is required to demonstrate said level. Now, there's no standard measure because there are a number of variables that play key roles. One of them would be motivation. If you're learning 3, 4, maybe 5 hours of English a week, maybe more, but you don't engage with the language on your own time, then your progress might be slightly slower than, say, a candidate who's having the same amount of instruction, but also trying to engage with the language outside of it. Now, outside of the classroom. Again, motivation and exposure. How motivated is the learner? How much exposure do they have to the language? And this is just one of a couple of the variables. There are obviously more. How can we help them? That's the sole purpose of this discussion, is how can we help our learners progress to their goals to achieve the standard that they're looking for? So I'd like for us to spend some time talking about how we can measure proficiency with improved precision. And during this segment of the presentation, I'd like to mention how the global scale of English can support us in doing that. Okay, let's look at the Common European Framework boundaries. In principle, a learner would start here, a learner who's really starting from scratch, which are not necessarily as common anymore because we have exposure to English words everywhere. But they would start here at the pre-A1 level. Their objectives, depending on their personal needs and of course the curriculum in our space or our segment, K through 12 or college curriculum, it really depends, would determine what our goals are. Now, I've mentioned that B2 is one of the most commonly aspired levels or one of the most commonly required levels. Let's look at that curve or that steep hill from the A1 learner who wants to reach a B2. There are quite a few descriptors in each level that represent how that candidate should be performing with the language or should be using the language to confidently say that they have achieved that level. But it can be quite hard to pin down. So in order to support this, Pearson has developed the global scale of English. You might have heard some of my colleagues in previous presentations refer to it and how it's aligned or embedded into our courseware. Now, what the global scale of English has managed to do is break those very broad bands within the CEFR into slight segments or chunks that can be measured perhaps with a bit more precision. So they're not competing scales. It's not one or the other. They complement each other. And they help us be more in tune and be able to better understand where our learners are and how much they need to cover before they are where they need to be. So if I'm working with a candidate and I've managed to understand that they are a 40 GSE, I understand that they are an A2 learner. If my candidate's goal is ultimately a B2, let's say a starting B2, then I understand that they have quite a bit to go before they can reach that, and I can inform that candidate and assess them accordingly. Now, as I said, the CEFR and the GSE are not competing scales. They're designed to complement each other. So much so that if you look at the companion volume, the most recent 2018 one, you'll see that the Council of Europe has thanked Pearson for its contribution in the development of the global scale of English and the development of descriptors. So they're very much companions to each other. Now let's bring it down to actionable items. How can you integrate GSE in your day-to-day instruction? My first response to that, and again, this might be something that my colleagues have reiterated in the past, but I'm personally very much in love with this tool because it's absolutely brilliant. You can integrate it in your day-to-day instruction using the teacher toolkit. And you will see that the teacher toolkit will allow you to set your learning objectives, and you can move these bars to select the level that you would like to work with based on your learner's need. You can also decide to focus on grammar and vocabulary. You can also choose the type of learner, and you can also choose the skill that you like to focus on. So all these things are available, and this is a free tool available on our website that you can use as many times as you want, and you can download from it what you need for your classes. So you can select the type of learner that you're teaching, whether it's academic English, general English, or professional English, or if you're working with young learners, you can choose the right level using either a GSE range, so global scale of English range, or a CEFR range. And you can also select what you would like to focus on, whether it is reading, writing, listening, or speaking. So that is a very rich tool that can help you really narrow down the objectives and focus on those areas that you know better than anyone are important for your learners. Now, you might be asking yourselves, what difference does it really make? Excuse me. And I wanted to pull this example because I think is as an illustration of what you can do with the global scale of English. So let's look at vocabulary to express disagreement. Remember, you can select vocabulary in the teacher toolkit. How can we express disagreement? Well, the most standard form of doing so is just by saying no. Now, what level would that response be? Strictly speaking, no would be a pre-A1 response. You can go a step further. Not really. That would be an A2 response, but it would be more expected of a GSE 38 score. Take it one step further even. Your candidate might say, I disagree. Now, while at the CEFR level, these two responses are both A2 plus, if you look at the vocabulary aid of the GSE, you'll notice that they're actually a couple of points apart. Same goes for, with all due respect, for example, as a slightly more advanced response to express disagreement. You're starting with all due respect, and then you're going to introduce your point of view. Now that answer is a B2 plus. But if you take a step further and say, everyone is entitled to their opinion, it's still a B2 plus if we're strictly looking at CEFR. But if we look at the GSE, it's a slightly more advanced response. Now, we as teachers have a certain gut feeling that it is a more advanced response. So we know that there's a difference in the level of a candidate who says, I'm not so sure, from the level of a candidate who says something like, I beg to differ. What the GSE does is helps us quantify or express in a more concrete way what that difference is. You can already tell I'm a big fan of the GSE and the teacher toolkit. Just a quick reminder, the teacher toolkit, if you look up on your browsers, GSE teacher toolkit is a free tool, is available to anyone. You can personalize whatever it is you want to use it for and download the learning objectives you want to focus on. So don't miss out on doing that. But for the last part of this presentation, I want us to spend some time talking about our proposal as Pearson English for assessment and how it can fit into what we've been discussing. Pearson English has developed proficiency assessment products that are mapped to the proficiency journey stages. So we talk about the stages as the placing stage, where you apply a diagnostic exam to understand where your candidates are at before starting the course of instruction. And this is fundamental for us to understand where this candidate is currently standing and how they can progress to where they want to be. We also have the benchmark stage, where we can measure how our candidates have progressed against their goals and against our class goals. And then, of course, we have the certify stage, where candidates can take a summative assessment in the form of an internationally awarded exam to demonstrate these skills that they have achieved. Now, you will see that the journey is split into young learners, adults, and higher education. And you will see that we have the different segments, and it's mapped in a way that is cohesive with how the learning journey works. But for today, I'm going to focus a little bit on the 14 plus segment, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the tools here. First thing I want to mention is the Pearson English Level Test. Now, this is a quick and scalable diagnostic test to support your learners' needs. One of the things that we've heard from educators before going into the development phase of this tool was that correctly placing candidates can be a challenge, because candidates are trained to perform a certain way in multiple choice assessments, for example, which are a common way for us to do this. But when they actually have to use their productive skills, for example, you can determine that their level is somewhat lower than initially expected in that multiple choice assessment. So what Level Test does is it offers a cost-effective, artificial intelligence-backed, fast, and easy-to-use alternative. Now, let me get a bit into more detail. The placement test covers all levels, and it produces results in the CEFR bands, but it also gives you a GSE range. It is suitable for learners 14 and older, and you can have a shorter version, so like a 3-skill test that does not include speaking, and it can be done in as little as 20 minutes using a computer from anywhere, basically. Or you can have the 30-minute version, which includes the 4 skills. Now, this is something that they can do online, at home, or in the classroom. And the solutions that I'm showing here are all offered within the same platform. So it's a single stop for anything that you have to do regarding these assessments. Now, results are returned within minutes. This is typically what happens. And what this does is addresses that need for an accurate diagnostic exam, but that is scalable. You can have hundreds of learners take this and have results for them within minutes. Now, let's look a little bit at the score report sample that I have here. The level test will give you the current capabilities of your learners It'll tell you what they are able to do, the current skills that they have. But it will also give you an overall CEFR score and a GSE band. This can help you place those learners at the right level in the courses that you're preparing. And if you're not able to place them by level, which is also possible if you're teaching, for example, K through 12, you can't really place candidates based on their level. They're placed mostly on their year of studying. You can also understand better where your course is. So you can understand if your aim is to have a B2 class or a B2 certificate at the end of the cycle, and you have a candidate who's a B1, you understand that this candidate has a way to go before they can reach that B2 and can guide their instruction. If you have a candidate who, on the contrary, is at an A2, you understand that this candidate is significantly below the level that you will be aiming in instruction. So you will need to differentiate as best as you can to support that learner. The other thing that is incorporated into the level test is a performance summary by skill. Now you have the overall performance, and this is critical because language proficiency is made out of the combination of our performance across the different skills, but also grammar and vocabulary. What this does is provide further insight into the candidate's performance. So you can see which skill they've performed best at. So typically this would be the skill they're strongest at. And you can also see the skills where they need a bit further work. So in this example, we can see that the candidate who took this exam has a listening performance summary, which is at level, has a reading that is above level, has a writing that is above level, but has a speaking that is below level. So this tells us as educators that for this candidate, we need to put a bit more focus into helping them develop that productive speaking skill. Now, something else that is incorporated into our assessment journey is the mapping with courseware titles. So if you have the score report and you're looking at the group report for your class, which is not particularly featured here, but you as educators have a group report for all your learners, you can map that to the Pearson courseware title that you're using. Let's take as an example, Speak Out, 2nd edition or 3rd edition. You can map it to that courseware and you can see what activities you should use to guide your instruction to support the overall learning objectives for your class. Now, if you also want to distribute your learners into groups, you want to have a different layout from direct instruction, you can also have the information of which learners are performing at a similar level or with similar needs, so you can group them together and give them that bit of differentiated instruction. Now, you've placed your learners in the right level. How do you track their progress? Again, there are a number of ways that you can do this. And what I'm showing you here is just our proposal as Pearson English to help you with these goals. Ultimately, the choice is yours, and we're just a range of options from which you can choose. Now, benchmark tests can be used in any English teaching program to help measure progress in detail and help you offer tailored direction for students, for your learners. Again, this is a very accurate test, it's AI backed. It can be used with any course. This is true for all of assessments. While I mentioned that you can map to our courseware if you are using it, that's not a prerequisite to using our assessment. Now, it's about 45 minutes. It goes in bands A, B1, B2, and then C, and it gives you a GSE score. Now, this is slightly more detailed, obviously, because we're trying to measure progress. Now, it will give you a GSE score. It will give you a sample or a taste of the current capabilities that the learner has, and it also gives you the underlying CEFR score. Like I mentioned, these two work very tightly together. I'm just going to do a quick check of how I'm doing with time. Okay. Now, same as before, for the score report, you get a performance summary for each learner. that helps you understand where they are as an overall, but also where they are with each one of the skills. And you can also use courseware mapping with this assessment, which means that if you are using a Pearson title, you can select it, you can select which level of that Pearson title you're using, and you will see this at the bottom. These are a selection of units and activities that can help improve the performance at this particular skill. So it's a comprehensive journey from placing in the right level to understanding whether they're making progress, which you would be able to see with the granularity of the score report and the performance summary. And you can compare the two. So if you had a level test at the beginning of your school year and you have a benchmark test, say halfway through or towards the end of it, you would be able to compare where your student is standing compared to where they started. Now let's look at our checklist. These assessments help identify the student's strengths and weaknesses. They help assist educators in the planning of subsequent instruction, and they aid students in guiding their own learning. And this is very much tied to that initial definition that we discussed about formative assessments. Now, one of the last steps that you can find in any proficiency journey, which again is very common across different educational levels, but also different work environments as our requirement, is a certified exam. And what a certified exam does is just guarantee that the exam was taken under secure conditions, and there's an external party or an external exam board that ensures the results are valid. Now, again, you have numerous options for this, but Pearson English has also an alternative, which is the international certificate. This has been more recently launched in its online version and is suitable for learners 14 and plus. It's available in all 6 levels of the Common European Framework of Reference, and it is awarded by Edexcel, which is the UK's largest awarding body and Ofqual regulated. Now, a few key features, as I know I'm a bit tight with time, is that it's available in paper and online. For paper, you have 7 times a year. For online, you have on demand. And you can take it from home if you're using the online format, or you can take it from an authorized test center. You get results in 2 weeks or less if you're using the online format, or you get results in 6 weeks if you're using the paper-based format. One of the key components of this is if you're ending an academic cycle and your target was a B2, candidates can achieve a certificate that they can carry with them to their next step of instruction, because it's a certificate that does not have an expiration date. It's a secure watermark certificate that is issued and sent from the UK upon achieving a pass or above. Now, you might have noticed that the international certificate is mapped to the CEFR. We've been talking about the GSE so far. As I said, they complement each other. And we know that that's important to highlight. This is all part of a broader Pearson Connected English Learning Program, where the idea is for us to provide you with tools to help you plan your instructions in the form of the GSE Teacher Toolkit, which we've discussed earlier. But we also provide you with tools to teach and learn. So our courseware is designed to support you in every stage. And the tools that my colleagues have been showing are a vivid example of how, when we are building our courseware, we try to make sure that you as educators have what you need to help you make your teaching and learning activities simple, fast, and efficient. So you can have a test generator activity. You can have a teacher book that helps you with the planning. So all of this is part of that journey. Then, of course, we have the checkpoints. These are where you check how students are measuring against their goals. And you have what we've called here repair, which is basically remediation activities for you to help address the areas or the segments where you think candidates might need a bit further help to reach, again, their objectives. And as I said before, it might not just be repair, it might not just be remediation, but it might also be enhancement activities. Of course, one of the final stages would be assessing, which can be a formal certified assessment or a state exam or any other form of summative assessment that goes into the broader scoring of the candidate, if you will. And then we go back in the cycle, because candidates are more likely than not going to continue their educational journey, whether it is they are in a K through 12 cycle, but also higher education, or just something that has been very common, the upskilling movement. So learners are looking at the job markets, adult learners primarily are looking at the job markets and identifying some key skills that they need in order to progress in their careers or to change careers, however, whatever it is that they want to pursue. And they're likely to find themselves needing to upskill. One of the primary skills that they need, or one of the primary skills that employers are still seeking, is, of course, English proficiency, which you are well familiar with. I want to thank you so much for listening to me throughout this presentation, but I also want to give some time if you have any questions for me. As I said, it's been an absolute joy joining you today. If you have any questions or you would like to learn more, please let me know. If you'd like more information about any of the assessments that we've discussed here today, you can feel free to contact your local representative. They'll be delighted to give you more details. And if you have any questions for me about any of the things that we covered today, please do feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from you anytime. I am going to stop sharing now. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.